January 17th, 5:02 p.m. Tamara. It was not a typical drive with the top down kind of evening. The icy wind stabbed my face like 1,000 razor-sharp needles. Painful, yet somehow exhilarating. When I woke up this morning, I hadn't planned on ending up here, flying down Interstate 5 in my 1985 Volkswagen Cabriolet. But here I was. Most people would have probably labeled me nuts, and I couldn't say I blamed them. It was the middle of January in Washington. The sun was about to dip behind the mountains, but I didn't care. I needed some kind of shock to break through the funk that had been building around my brain for the last hour. The tears had dried about 80 miles ago, and a thick fog had rolled over my mind, buffering me from the pain. An image of Danny standing in our driveway, bare-chested, his eyes pleading with me not to go, cut through the haze. I gunned the accelerator. My beanie blew off in the wind and my hair whipped around my face. I was never going back. A serrated knife twisted deep inside my chest as tears stung the back of my eyes. I swallowed the knot that formed in my throat, forcing myself to shut down the emotion. Danny was just like the rest of them. He wasn't worth another moment of my anguish. My eyes landed on the charm Charlie had given me for my birthday, dangling from my wrist. God, if you still care, will you please help? I'm sick of all this pain. It was probably futile to pray now after so many years, but a tiny part of me thought maybe he'd still listen, even after everything. A stupid notion, no doubt. In the distance, a city came into view and I breathed a sigh of relief. Vancouver, which meant Portland was close. Soon I would be out of this state that held so many terrible memories. Maybe somewhere in Oregon I could start over and forget the heartbreak. I flipped on the radio. 1999 by Prince blared out of my speakers. Nice. Prince was singing to me. My party was over, and I was out of time. I pushed in the car cigarette lighter and snatched up my pack of Camel 99s. I lit one up, turned up the volume, and lost myself in the sharp beats of the chorus. I want a party like 1999! I shouted, releasing my heaviness into the wind, letting the insanity take over. The number 99 from my smokes, coupled with the lyrics, lit up my brain. Was it a sign? Hope filled me for a moment, raising me above the dark clouds looming over my mind. Freedom, followed by a brief moment of clarity. Forget Danny. Forget ocean shores. From now on, I'd make my own destiny. Tonight I'm gonna party! I yelled again with the song. A billow of smoke rose from the hood of my car. Seriously? This was not happening. I punched the steering wheel and flipped on the turn signal. Was the car on fire? My heart sped up as I merged onto the exit and took the first left, desperately looking for a place to pull over. Smoke poured out from beneath my hood as if my car had become an active volcano. A few blocks ahead, I spotted a 7-Eleven. I took a sharp turn across traffic, pulled into the parking lot, and turned off my car. I grabbed my purse and bolted out of the vehicle. Considering my fortune, the car would spontaneously combust and leave me not only stranded, but also without access to my funds. Circling the car, I scanned underneath for flames. There wasn't any visible fire, and the smoke had died down some since I turned off the engine. Are you okay? A man stood on the other side of my car, face filled with concern. He was around 6 feet tall with a build that reminded me of Channing Tatum. His blue jeans and gray hoodie were snug enough to show he hit the gym quite a bit. Kinda chilly for a joyride, isn't it? Maybe a little. I tightened my scarf and rubbed my hands together. He must have thought I was a complete maniac. His mouth quirked up at the edges, and the smile brightened his hazel eyes. I work across the street. He tilted his head toward the restaurant on the opposite side of the road. I couldn't help but notice you pull in. He stepped around the car and extended his hand.
I'm Joe.
Tamara. I shook his hand. You wouldn't happen to know a good mechanic, would ya?
I do. But why don't you let me take a look at it? Could be something simple.
As Joe walked to the front of the car, I settled back into the driver's seat and pulled the small lever under the steering wheel. He lifted the hood and disappeared behind it. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and heat flooded my frozen cheeks. Oh my goodness, it was worse than I thought. My hair was in ratted coils standing out in all directions like Medusa's snakes. My green eyes, usually my most striking quality, were lined with smudged mascara, making me look slightly deranged. Okay, maybe completely deranged. My pale cheeks seemed sunken, as if I wasn't getting the proper nutrition. I'd always been told I was a pretty girl, but at that moment, I looked worse than death. I grabbed a rubber band from my purse, raked my fingers through my hair, and pulled it up into a ponytail. Then I licked the pads of my thumbs and ran them under my eyes to remove the smudges. One more look in the mirror showed better. Not great, but better. I climbed out of my car and walked toward the front. Joe was leaning over, inspecting the motor.
It looks like the radiator hose came loose and sprayed coolant all over the engine. That's what caused the smoke.
He looked up and smiled.
I can jury-rig it together for now, but it will just be a temporary fix.
Literally the best news I'd heard all day.
You won't want to drive it far until you change out the hose.
I bit my lip and glanced to the side. Being stuck anywhere wasn't good. Having to stay at a hotel could seriously drain my funds, and I only had enough to get by for a month or so.
Something wrong?
Joe asked, voice sincere and kind. My eyes met his. There was something about him that made me want to tell him everything. Was it his honest face? His warm eyes? I shut down the urge immediately. From now on, it was just me. People were all the same. They always had an angle, and in the end, they would always hurt me. I averted my gaze. It's been a long day.
Sorry. Let me fix this real quick and you can be on your way.
Thank you. I turned away before he could see the tears welling in my eyes. I pulled out my pack of cigarettes as I walked toward the back of my car. I leaned on the trunk, lit up, and looked around. There was a help wanted sign in the window of the restaurant where Joe said he worked. The green neon sign over the entrance said Highway 99 Diner. I glanced down at my pack of smokes and ran my finger over the number 99. What was it about that number?
All right.
Joe's voice interrupted my thoughts.
That should do it.
He wiped his hands on the front of his jeans. Thank you. Can I pay you for your time? He looked insulted.
Absolutely not. I'm happy to help. And if there's anything else you need, you know where I work.
I studied him for a moment. Why are you being so nice to me? He shrugged.
I know what it's like to be down on my luck.
As Joe walked away, my gaze returned to the help wanted sign in the restaurant window. I drew in a deep breath and took in my surroundings. I was at the corner of 99th Street and Highway 99. A strange sensation worked its way through my entire body. Was this number leading me towards something better? Was it an omen that all of the truly awful things were behind me now? Maybe I could start all over right here. Maybe this time, it would be different. 1 year later. January 17th, 6:36 a.m. Tamra. A lot can change in a year's time. For me, not so much. Sure, the landscape was different. New town, new job, new people, but that was about it. I was no longer afraid of Ryan showing up on my doorstep to bring retribution for the money I stole from him. Now I was just afraid of everyone else. I turned into the parking lot of the Highway 99 diner, parked in a spot near the back, and let out a deep yawn. Last night, as I tried to sleep, memories battered me like a buoy in a relentless storm. The night I left home, fleeing from Ryan, Danny's betrayal, They all pressed down on my soul like a giant vice, crushing the life out of it. I slammed the door on the way out of my car and drug my feet toward the diner. One of the 9s in the neon sign on the side of the restaurant had burnt out. How ironic. Looked like my omen was a dud, after all. It started to rain and I picked up the pace. I so did not want to work today. Yesterday I had pulled a double because one of my co-workers supposedly had family coming in from out of town. More than likely, she wanted to go party it up on a Friday night, but whatever. At least today was my Friday. The smell of bacon grease, coffee, and pancakes hit my nose as I walked through the door. Betty, the graveyard waitress, sneered. "You late." Betty was in her late 40s, but her deep worry lines and defined crow's feet made her look at least 10 years older. The bad perm and dye job didn't help much either. I gave her a half-hearted, "sorry," and glanced around the restaurant. A woman with a slight build sat at the bar sipping coffee. All of the diner's 13 tables were empty. "Rough night?" Betty looked over the glasses that rested on her long, crooked nose, her expression condescending. "Not how you're thinking, but you could say that. I couldn't sleep." I hurried across the room. The red and white tiled floor and fluorescent lights seemed as reproachful as Betty's mood. "Okay, who is he?" I snatched my apron from the hook behind the cash register. "There isn't anybody. I just had a lot of things on my mind and couldn't sleep. End of story." Not that it was her business either way. "Whatever you say, honey. Next time, just make sure you get here on time." I turned toward the kitchen and pushed through the double doors. Why was she busting my chops over a measly 6 minutes? She wasn't exactly Miss Punctual herself, and there was only one patron in the whole restaurant. Joe stood off to the left of the kitchen by the time clock. He had obviously just arrived, but no one was giving him a hard time about it. He stripped off his black pea coat and gray American Eagle beanie and ran a hand through his light brown hair. "Hey, Tam. How you doing?" His warm hazel eyes crinkled at the edges as he smiled. "I could use some coffee. Would you like me to pour you a cup?" I hung my jacket and purse on a hook next to the time clock and put on my apron. "Sure." He leaned his tall, beefy frame on the counter next to him. Joe was in his mid-20s, and honestly, completely adorable. Not that I thought of him like that. He had a sometimes girlfriend. One of those on-again, off-again affairs that was far too complicated to keep up with. Last I heard, they got back together, and she moved in with him. But I was never nosy enough to find out if that was true. Yawning, I handed him a cup of coffee. "I'm so glad I have tomorrow off. It's been a long week." "I hear that. Got any big plans?" I yawned again. "Oh, yeah. I got a hot date with my bed. Go to bed early and sleep in late. That's what I'm talking about." He shot me a disapproving look. "Girl, you need to get a life." The bells clanged against the door in the dining room. "Rescued by the cling-a-ling." Joe shrugged and raised his hands in playful defeat. He meant well, but I didn't have the mental energy for this conversation. Several times over the last year, Joe had butted into my personal life by setting me up with one of his friends. Each time, it had been a complete disaster. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbing a menu on the way. Levi Taylor, one of my regulars, had already made his way to his usual seat. He'd been coming in a couple of times a week for a few months now. Usually he'd show up around 6:45, when it was still quiet, order scrambled eggs with diced tomatoes, and drink coffee. Lots of coffee. He didn't really say much, but I found him intriguing. Not in a physical way, even though he was quite attractive. He was in his mid-30s with dark brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and a genuine smile that made me feel like life could actually be better. He was always warm and friendly, but he'd never tried to pick me up like some of the other dirtbags around this place. Plus, I was pretty sure he was married, because he had a tattoo band on his left ring finger. After he finished his breakfast, he would stay for a while, listening to his iPod, sipping coffee, and writing in his journal. Before he left, he'd write a little note for me on his ticket. It was always simple, like, "Hope you have a great day," or just, "Great service," with a smiley face. I filled a mug with coffee, walked over, and set it down in front of him. "Good morning, Levi. You want your usual?" He looked up at me and smiled.
Yes, please. And keep the coffee coming. I think I need a little extra this morning.
"Sure. I'll make another pot." As I put in Levi's order, Joe placed 2 plates of food in the window. It looked like a number 3 from the menu. A trio of eggs, bacon, hash browns, and a triple stack of pancakes. Taking hold of the plates, I spun around and placed them down in front of the lady sitting at the bar. "Here you go." She grabbed her fork and dug into the stack of pancakes as if it was her first meal in weeks. I refilled her coffee cup and tried not to stare. It was hard not to, though. She reminded me of my younger sister. What was it exactly? Her dark hair? Her slight build? She looked up at me mid-bite and I quickly turned away. Her eyes held a pain that I was all too familiar with. Images of my last night at home crashed into me. The same vivid imagery that had kept me up last night. Memories. Who needed them? Everywhere I turned lately, something was reminding me of my past, when all I wanted was to forget. Around 7:15, things got busy, and just like that, I was running from one end of the diner to the next, trying to keep everything straight. My sleep deprivation made it a bit more difficult, but I made it through unscathed. Mornings like this made me wish my boss would hire someone to bust the tables. It took 35 minutes before I had a chance to clear Levi's booth. He had left enough money for his bill and the tip, but the note at the bottom of today's ticket felt different. It read, "Keep your chin up. It will get better," with the usual smiley face next to it. Strange. How did he know I was having a hard time? Was it that obvious? I looked around to make sure everything was taken care of, then ducked into the ladies' room to examine myself in the mirror. I did look a little tired, but not that bad. Shrugging it off, I headed back out to clean the rest of the dining room.
January 17th, 10:29 a.m. Joe. There was something different about Tamra this morning. I watched her through the cook's window and wondered what it was. She bustled from table to table, clearing dishes and setting new silverware rolls and coffee cups on them. Outwardly, she looked the same as she always did. Light brown hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, a few wisps out of place. Her green eyes were highlighted with smoky gray eyeshadow, high cheekbones tinted with a light shade of blush. I poured water on the grill and a steam cloud erupted. I picked up the spatula and scraped this morning's breakfast rush mess off the grill. Over the last year, Tamara and I worked together. We'd gotten pretty close. Well, as close as she'd let anyone get. Our friendship had an ease to it that didn't happen with everyone. Despite that, I didn't completely understand her. On the surface, she was friendly, but she was always a bit guarded. Most of the time, it felt like I was getting only half the story. Today, though, there was a sadness in her eyes, like something was eating her from the inside out. There had to be a way to approach the subject, but she was such a private person. If I brought it up, she'd probably deny it. I gave the grill another quick wipe down and threw the towel in the laundry bucket before grabbing an extra package of corned beef from the walk-in cooler. My phone hummed in my pocket on the way back to my work area. I threw the meat in the sink to thaw and answered it. "Hey, sweetie, you called earlier?" Susan said. "Yeah, a couple of things. First, I wanted to see if you're going to be able to make it to the AA meeting tonight. I couldn't have made it this far without you. I don't know. I may have to work late." Of course. She always worked late. And early, for that matter. Okay, I understand. Actually, I didn't, but I didn't want to start a fight. Is there any way you could pick up a few things for tomorrow night from the grocery store on the way home? Tomorrow night? Don't tell me you forgot. It was your idea. Silence. The party. My sobriety birthday. Realization seemed to dawn. Of course I didn't forget. It just slipped my mind for the moment. Busy day at the office. 3 years tomorrow, I said. And a lifetime left to go. If she was joking, I didn't see the humor in it. That's one way to look at it. But in the program, we like to take it one day at a time. The sarcasm was impossible to rein in. I don't like your tone, Joe. Yeah? Well, you know what I don't like? My voice started to escalate. I don't like the way you never give me any credit. It's like you're looking for me to fail. Is that what you think? Her voice shook. I hadn't meant to hurt her. Why couldn't she understand that I'd worked so hard to stay sober for her? For us? Baby, I'm sorry. That came out all wrong. I just think maybe you should go to Al-Anon or some sort of support group with me, so you can understand my disease. We've been over this before, Joe. You know I don't have time for that. Besides, it's not me who has the problem. Why should I have to pay for it? Ouch. Sad, but unequivocally true. She shouldn't have to pay for my disease, but in so many ways she already had. You're right. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of everything.